Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis doing some cleanup of Alabama basketball and already looking ahead as Nate Oates is doing. There are truly no days off for him. Obviously, Alabama's season comes to an end one step short of getting back to the Final Four for the second time in as many seasons. He's already turned the page to the transfer portal, which we're also going to do here. But Tony, this is our first recording since Alabama's loss, 85-65 loss to Duke in the Elite Eight. We're not going to talk specifically about that game since, you can go over to Tide Illustrated and listen to or read about all the cleanup and all the stuff from that game specifically. But Alabama season comes to an end as a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. They get to the Elite Eight, third Elite Eight appearance in school history, but couldn't take it one step further. Was not able to be the only non-1 seed to make the Final Four. Of course, we've got all four 1 seeds ended up going. But when you've had some time to reflect now on this season being officially in the books for Alabama, the big question before we turn to some off-season stuff here, do you think in your eyes, was this a successful season for Alabama basketball under Nate Oates, following up that Final Four run, 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, bowed out in the Elite Eight?
Yeah, I think it was based on what happened at the beginning of the season when they built this, super roster, the best collection of players they've ever had. I think that the expectation was Final Four or bust. But since then, you had Latrell Wrightsell go down to a season-ending injury in November. You had Darian Reed kind of was injured, most of SEC play, it felt like. Never got to develop into the player he could have been. You had Grant Nelson dealing with injuries, but it seemed like the whole second half of the season. And while he was able to play, I think Grant could have been a lot better if he wasn't dealing with those injuries. So, between those three things happening, I think that kind of moved Alabama from that elite class to a great class. And I think they reached that great potential to the, ironically, the Elite Eight. But I don't know if they were, at the end of the season, one of the 4 best teams. And we so happened to get a Final Four that was the 4 best teams in college basketball. So I think you would have put Alabama at probably the 6th best team after everything happened to them. I think maybe somewhere in that range, 5 or 6. And that's where they finished, in the Elite Eight. So I think it was good. It was a successful season. There's only 8 teams that make the Elite Eight. Alabama's only done that twice before this year, including last year when it went to the Final Four. So, there was a time even, 4 years from now or 4 years ago, or really even, 2 years ago, that you would have said Alabama making the Elite Eight. Wow, it's one of the, this is a celebratory season. So I don't think you can be too disappointed by it. Obviously, they wanted to make the Final Four, but they didn't. I think another good thing, I think some of the disappointment from Alabama fans might have originally stemmed from, I think when this roster was built, there was kind of a little bit of an idea of maybe it's a one or done. Like, this is do or die, basically. They built this super roster. You better get back to the Final Four this year because you never know what it's going to be like. I just don't think that's going to be the case anymore. With Nate Oates, I think you're going to be able to build super rosters. They might not have the, preseason player of the year with Mark Sears, but they're going to be Final Four caliber rosters. And I expect them to, it's still early days, but I expect them to put together another competitive roster, probably a roster that puts them in the top 10 nationally, and one that, once you're in the top 10 nationally, like we saw, Florida wasn't projected to be, what was Florida to begin the season, around the top 10, but not a top 4, and look at now, I think you'd argue that they're probably the best team, or a lot of people would call them the best team. So if you're in that top 10, I think a lot of it just determines, how things click for you, and you put you in the ball game. I think Alabama will be in the ball game for next year. I think that kind of also takes away maybe from some of the doom and gloom of not making a Final Four. If I can even say doom of gloom of not making a Final Four, because the Elite Eight is great.
Yeah, I think if you're an Alabama fan, you do have to stop for a second and just say to yourself, you have a right to be, when Nate Oates says Final Four bust and you don't get there, you have every right to be a little disappointed in not reaching that goal. But you also, I think, should take a step back and say, man, saying, oh, we only made it to the Elite Eight is a pretty significant leap from where this program was before Nate Oates arrived. And I think you're exactly right. Some in a couple of regards, I think some of the disappointments can be down to, Mark Sears weirdly enough, was a first team All-American, even though his numbers weren't as good, and had, maybe some moments where, you would have, where he struggled. And I think struggled with the extra attention he was getting. We talked about that all year long. Grant Nelson had some ups and downs. Everyone, it just kind of didn't seem that this team was fully able to click into that, roster that it was on paper at any, for any lengthy amount of time. They obviously showed it in enough flashes to get a number 2 seed. So that, I think, is where maybe some of the frustrations can come in. But I don't think you can look at it from a disappointment standpoint either. I think you've got to be pretty impressed with where Nate Oates is taking this program. And I think you're right. I think throughout the course of the year, and now even into the offseason, it has switched from this one and done, we've got 5 fifth-year seniors, a chance to go back and win the whole darn thing, and who knows who cares what happens after that, to now, you look at this offseason and potentially some of the guys that are coming back, and of course the guys who, they're linking themselves to in the transfer portal, which is just becoming more and more of a significant piece to roster building. I think I read somewhere it was 750 guys entered on the first day it opened, which, by the way, was still when Alabama was in the NCAA tournament. And so that obviously plays a factor. You've got Nate Oates. I mean, Preston Murphy made it is 73 phone calls I saw somewhere on the first day. And, you've got a good recruitment strategy in place that has proven to bring this team sustained success. I mean, half of the Final Four run was built off a team of transfers: Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, even guys like Nick Pringle. Rylan Griffin was a recruit, to Alabama's credit there. Latrell Wrightsell, another one. And I think you saw a lot of that last year. So you turn the page this April through, I guess, the end of April, when the portal closes or whenever Alabama's done with their business, becomes just as important sometimes as the buildup to, the NCAA tournament. And as we turn that page to that, Tony, when you look at the outlook now for Alabama's roster, I mentioned the departures. The 4 fifth-year starters are all gone: Mark Sears, Chris Youngblood, Clifford Amore, and Grant Nelson. The only other current expected departure or for sure departure is Naz Cunningham, the redshirt guard, or the redshirt forward, was a freshman, redshirted, didn't play the whole year, and is already in the portal. Second year in a row that's happened. When you look at the rest of this roster, obviously, I'm sure more turnover will happen. At the time of recording, it hasn't officially yet. What do you assess in terms of how this team continues to build and gets back to this number 2 seed status, this Elite 8 status, and everything like that? What are you looking for in terms of the transfer portal and the approach to this offseason?
It sure seems that Nate Oates is targeting defense with the names that he's bringing in. It seems like he's trying to get bigger and kind of trying to fix some of the places where Alabama was lacking last year. It's, in the backcourt, Alabama was kind of not as long after it, it lost guys like Millette, and then Reed went down. And so you weren't as you had Youngblood and Sears and Holloway, and you weren't as big in the backcourt. I think you're seeing Alabama target a lot of 6'5" guards, 6'6" guards that can also shoot. So I think that's going to be big. I think there's always going to be, a mold of player that Nate Oates targets. It's going to be a guy that can shoot, a guy that's willing to play defense. But I see defense and length as two things that are really being targeted when you look at some of the people they brought in. And they're already off to a good start. From everything that we're hearing, it seems like Alabama's in a good place to keep Aiden Sherrill. You never know in college basketball. People can leave. You never know if somebody's going to throw down like $3 million on Aiden Sherrill. Good luck keeping him, right? But from what I've heard, Alabama is in a good spot to keep him. He should be the starting center. And for you to get a guy like Noah Williamson from Bucknell, who was this conference player of the year in, I forget which conference it was. You'll know that, I won't. But
the Patriot League.
Patriot League, yes. But to get, even though it's the Patriot League,
put some respect on the Patriot League. I mean, come on now. Cornell, Cornell. Exactly. Sorry, Colgate, Bucknell. Come on.
You put some respect on the Patriot League. Teams, right? But no, I think that to get a player of the year from a conference to come in and be a backup, because that's what Noah Williams is going to be, is a backup. That's a great start. 7-foot guy. Now, granted, I think he's going to have to beef up, and I wonder if he's going. He's kind of skinny, and the Patriot League's not the SEC. So we'll see how he is and how he translates. But he's a guy that can hit From the outside, he obviously can score. He's 7 foot, so you're gonna have the length there. The 7-footers don't grow on trees, so it's good to get a guy
Well,
like
they
that.
are trees. They
Yeah,
grow into trees.
and I think that's a good start. You're seeing names. I think right now at the moment, you have got a great transfer portal hot board. I think the biggest name on there for Alabama is Taylor Bowen from Florida State, a 6'10" forward, kind of a Jaron Stevenson-ish like player, a guy that can shoot. He was 41.4% from three, but he's also got that 6'10" frame. You could theoretically play him as a small five. That's not what Alabama is going to want to do, but it is something to watch for. It. I think he's right now number one in terms of the most important addition Alabama can make.
Yeah, I'll give my 2 cents on Williamson too, because I think you're right in terms of his projected role. I look a lot at last season and what Nate Oates said throughout last season, or I guess 2 seasons ago when they went to the Final Four, if we're being technical, where Alabama seemed to kind of run out of bigs at times. Muhammad Wagi wasn't really up to snuff, also struggled with injuries throughout the entire season. Nick Pringle, sort of same thing. And then you had last year, you saw with Clifford Moore and Aiden Sherrill being both in the fold to back to the basket bigs. Obviously, Sherrill can do it a little bit more, but I digress. You had a lot more depth there, and it allowed Alabama to do a lot more things. I thought it allowed them to rebound better. And I think Nate is taking that approach with adding a guy like Williamson. You need someone in the event that, God forbid, Aiden Sherrill tears his ACL and is out for the year. You now have a 7-footer who can, to be honest, from watching his film, do a bit of different things. Now, the way I kind of spin that is, yes, it's the Patriot League. He was the player of the year in that, but not everything he can do is going to translate to the SEC. But what I see in him is he can do a lot of things that, if you really want one part of his game to translate to the SEC, he can probably make that jump. Now, the most likely part of that is just block shots and get rebounds. That's the role he's going to have to fill. But to me, I've seen people be like, oh, is he like the Grant Nelson replacement? He's a Cliff replacement. He's kind of just like another Aiden Sherrill. He's good in some pick and pop stuff. He can shoot it a little bit. And you saw the benefit of even for Alabama's guards with a guy like Sherrill who can pop out to the three and just draw those guys out. So he's, I think, a little bit more potentially versatile than even Cliff could have been for Alabama. Now, again, you have to project that to the SEC. Can he make the jump? But worst case, he is going to be a guy who gets you a good amount of blocks, a good amount of rebounds. He can stand in the lane and defend. And that's what I think Nate was not comfortable with not having in 2024. You saw him more comfortable with it in 2025. And to be honest, too, like you even last year saw, you had Sherrill and Cliff on the court at the same time a couple times. They would run three bigs, and that's where I'd segue to with your thought about Bull Bowen over from Florida State. You'd have even like Sherrill, Stevenson, and Amore on the court at once. I could totally see a world where maybe he goes ultra big, and it's a guy like Sherrill Williamson, and then you have Bull Bowen, who shot 40% from three in his second season at Florida State, but can also grab a fair amount of rebounds. I think the Stevenson comp is a good one for him. And I like him, and he's potentially one to watch. I'll throw another name out there, and then we can go back and forth about Corey Chest too from LSU because you talked about the guard length. I think there's, you talked about Bethea. I think the other two to throw in there, one really known name, one really not so much. The one I'm really looking for is Jaron Pierre Jr., player of the year in the Conference USA at Jacksonville State. He's been at 3 schools. I really like him. His numbers are really good. He can shoot the three, averaged like 20 or 21 points per game last season. He's one I think Alabama is going to really monitor. And then the other one, of course, Tony, is a potential returner from that Final Four team who we should talk about, Mr. Rylan Griffin, coming back, was at Kansas last year. This was a very classic, the grass is not always greener sort of situation for him. Transferred over there. His numbers were way down. He was back close to his freshman year numbers, just under 7 points a game, around 33% from three. If you remember the year before that with Alabama, he's at nearly 12 points a game and 39% from three. And he's a 6'6" guard who can defend a little bit. Do you think it's in your eyes, and just, I don't know, whether it's reading the tea leaves or just looking at those three options, whether it's Bethea, Pierre, and Griffin, you almost think, okay, maybe you go with Griffin. He's a proven commodity under Oates. But the vibe I'm kind of getting is they like some of these other guys, and they might kind of evaluate their options given what you're also getting back in the backcourt. You have some length back and guys like Houston Millette, and you have Aiden Holloway, Latrell Reitzel's another guard option. If Phylon comes back from the draft, could you see it a world where maybe they only add one or two guys, and maybe those guys aren't Rylan Griffin? I just feel like he's been the projected, oh, he's going to come back. That's the obvious filler there. But I look at some of these guys, and they feel pretty comparable to what Griffin gives if you can get them. Again, Bethea and Pierre, you have to project a little bit, but I think there's some valid options here. It doesn't seem like Griffin or bust, which I didn't get the vibe of, even a couple weeks back.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's if you're gonna go or bust, it's Jaren Pierre Jr. or bust. I think he's the best out of that group. Look, when you look at this thing, not only is he 6'5" or 6'6", he can pass the ball. Unlike the other two, I think when you look at it, there's a chance that Jaren Pierre Jr., if you can get him, and the big thing for him, I think, would be, is he going to go pro? He is going to test the draft waters. I think he'll come back, but if he leaves, then you lose that. But he's a guy that averaged 3.8 assists. He had some games where he had a double against, I think it was Fort Valley or something like that. He had a couple of double doubles against no-name schools where he had, but they were assist double doubles, and those are not easy to do at any level. But he is somebody that I think, if you didn't want to start Aiden because Aiden's a little bit smaller, you could put him as a point guard. You're not only losing Mark Sears, you might be losing LeBaron Phylon. That's a whole nother can of worms. Maybe Alabama brings in, but we're just going to, for the moment here, assume that LeBaron Phylon goes pro. In that case, I think Jaren Pierre might be your starting point guard, So I think while Rylan Griffin is important, he gives you that, a proven commodity. And while Bethea is, also a really good team, it's kind of hard to judge Bethea because Miami was so horrible and they lost their head coach. But I think Jaren Pierre Jr. is the one guy, if you gave Alabama their pick of that bunch, that's who they go with. So I think he's pretty big. If you can get him, I think let's just say you get him and Bull Bowen, you've got Pierre, Reitzel, then maybe you might go a Holloway, Pierre, Reitzel, or let's just say, who says it has to be, who says it has to be a and or thing? What if you could get Jaren Pierre, Reitzel, Rylan Griffin, Bull Bowen, and then Sherelle? I mean, that could be really good. Or they could do like what you said. You could do, kind of two, you could have Pierre and Reitzel, and then have a Stevenson, Bowen, Sherelle, if you wanted to go more bigs, whatever. There's ways you could do it. You could also play Holloway there. I think getting a guy, whether it's Pierre, whether it's Bowen, getting that length could allow you to play Reitzel and Holloway, two smaller guards, on the court at the same time. And I think Pierre gives you that ability to add an extra passer there and get some length, so I like the idea. Alabama operated at the end of the season with 2 point guards, basically, with LeBaron kind of turning into a point guard and Mark. I think you could see that with Aiden and Pierre if that's what it turns into. So I like that.
I think the Duke game where Nate Oates played against 6'5" or taller guys might have affected his offseason outlook a little bit. I think he wants to get a little bit longer. There were some games where I was just like, man, Mark Sears is skilled, but he is just smaller than all these poor guys. And so, yeah, it goes back to the top with what you said about this recruitment strategy. Length appears to be a priority, and how you make that length work within that system is big too.
The only thing I would say that scares me about Jaren Pierre Jr. is that, he shot 33 his first 2 years at Southern Miss, and then again at Wichita he shot 28, and then you see him jump up to 38. So I'm not sure that's a true 38. It's really easy to get excited about 38. Yep. I'd probably judge him at the 33% that he was early in his career. I don't think he's probably, it's probably great to take the average there. So some of these guys, the other thing too, I think we had brought up off air, Taylor Bowen, I think went from a 22% 3-point shooter to a 42%, probably somewhere in the middle there, right? But still, a guy that can shoot, that has length. Don't get too caught up with some of these numbers. Some of these guys are coming from different situations. It's harder to play in the SEC. We saw how good the SEC was. So don't get too caught up. Some of these numbers won't totally translate, but yeah, when you're looking at it, if you're to bring in those guys that we talked about, I think that you have the makings of a really solid team. And not only just there's one thing to build up a solid team of players that, are just skilled and they're just, talented. This would be a solid team of players that really complement themselves and the style that Nate Oates wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's ways you can get bigger but still stay pretty quick and still have the ability to shoot from three. And you're right about the numbers. It's always, there's some regression to the mean a little bit. It can show a sign of improvement, but it can also, it's a good reminder to just say, well, he's not going to jump from 40 to 44%. Just because he's kind of steadily improving. He's going to have to take his talents to the SEC if we're talking about Bull Bowen.
Yeah, at this point, Bull Bowen's, it's the same trajectory. I mean, he's going to be at 80% shoot 3-point for Alabama. So
there you go. If it keeps doubling,
Alabama's going to be undefeated in that point.
The only other name we should mention, and speaking of the SEC, would be a within SEC transfers if it does happen. This was kind of newsy here on Monday. He was on campus, seen wearing an Alabama uniform. There's a video that got put out with him. It's Corey Chest from LSU. And I just want your take on him, Tony, because it's a man who has earned some mixed opinion. Obviously had a huge game at Alabama. I'll remind people first and foremost, back in January, 12 points, I think it was 18 or 19 rebounds, which was his season high. Had, I think, 3 blocks in that game as well. Of course, the Tigers gave the Tide a little bit of a scare in that one. Mark Sears didn't play the second half. But Corey Chest, sort of this bruiser, 6'8" forward, he was like 6 rebounds, but also 6 points a game. Doesn't do a whole lot of things flashy. What do you think about him? Because he's gotten a little bit of a mixed opinion here amongst the Alabama fans.
He's definitely, when I say Nate Oates wants to add defense, that's definitely what they'd be doing. I think he's limited as an offensive player. He doesn't shoot away from the basket. He draws a ton of fouls, which is nice until you realize that he shoots 57% from the line. That being said, it is nice to draw fouls, get teams in foul trouble, and he's not going to be relied on as a scorer for Alabama. When you look at this offense and this Nate Oates offense, I mean, I guess you saw it with Amori. I don't know if he's as much of a lob threat as Amori was. I think the pessimistic view I have of Corey Chest is you're going 4-on-5 when you have the ball. Like, I don't know what he gives you offensively. Defensively, I think he can be a menace. I'm also kind of looking at this pessimistically. We're not giving any information. We don't know. It's not decided. But if you bring in a guy like Corey Chest, it really raises a question of whether or not you can keep Mo Diabate. Is Corey Chest coming in because Alabama just wants that guy, or is he coming in because Alabama knows it can't keep Mo Diabate? And personally, I'm a big Mo guy. And so I think that, when I look at it from that aspect, going from Mo Diabate to Corey Chest, I'm not very moved from an Alabama perspective. That being said, if you're just going to lose, if you're going to lose Mo Diabate anyways, there's an argument to look at it as a completely new team. You can't look at it as Mo Diabate from last year's team. If you are, if the NIL is not going to work out for Mo, and you bring in a guy like Taylor Bull Bowen that you're, happier with, and maybe you bring in a Rylan Griffin who's going to provide more of a shooting ability from the 3 spot, we'll call it, right? Or at least that third guard. I think then maybe it does make sense to have a Corey Chest that's going to kind of give you more of that defense, where some of the offense that you would get from Mo, you probably won't get from Corey Chest, but he's going to be a little bit, it's hard to say because, Mo was such a physical guy, but I think Corey Chest could be a huge blue collar guy as well. And he definitely fits that scrapyard dog that you kind of just need to have. And it looks like they're bringing in a lot of shooting, with some of the other names. So if they handle that, then maybe, when you look at it as a whole new team, then maybe Corey Chest makes more sense than Diabate. Yeah, I could get that argument when you look at it as a completely new team. But if you look for like from what we know, I think some of my pessimism comes from, I think Mo Diabate is a better player.
Yeah, I think I agree, and the other thing too is these two guys are the same age. Corey Chess, a redshirt freshman, didn't play his first year when of course Mohamed Diabate did. I almost wonder if I'm trying to think of a world where it is the two of them on the team together. I almost go to the same argument as I do for Williamson and Sherrill, where it's just maybe you have another guy like that. Like there was no one really on last year's team to do what Mo does, and a lot of the limitation that I think people got frustrated with, where it was why wasn't Mo playing a lot of minutes, doing this, that, and the other. Nate Oates said a lot of the time last year was because he wasn't all the way bought into scouting report stuff, and I think there was some hesitation with playing him in super extended minutes. And I'm not sure if I wonder if he brings in a guy like Chess to where he can say, you might start Mo, but you don't have to play 30 plus minutes for us. You can go be an engine for a shorter stint on the court, and then we can bring in this guy who does a similar thing, maybe brings a little bit less offensively, but block more shots than Mohamed Diabate and could be good defensively.
Yeah, so on a flip side, right, and we're just projecting, I want to make this clear that we're doing hypotheticals right now. When we have news, we will report it, and we will report it as news. So we're just throwing things against the wall here. And the argument I made about Chest and Diabate can be made the same way about Bowen and Stevenson. You bring in Bowen, are you going to see as much Stevenson? Maybe the writing on the wall is a different way. Maybe you do take Chest and you keep Diabate and you lose Stevenson. And all of a sudden, you have Bowen take some of those Stevenson minutes where Chest and Diabate, like you said, play off each other, kind of complement each other as different roles. Maybe that's what you're doing. So there's different ways you can do it. And in my head, I'm viewing it as maybe they're keeping Stevenson, Diabate might be leaving, and they're getting Chess. But it could be they're keeping Diabate and Stevenson might be leaving. And then that's where the Bowen thing kind of fits in. Theoretically, they could keep all four of them. I don't see a world where all four of those players are on the same team. I think that's just too many people that are too similar. At that point, you're going to be having to run like a 12-man rotation to make everybody happy. That's probably not going to work.
We'll see what happens. Obviously, in terms of it's one thing to me. I come down to if Nate Oates wants a guy and has a vision for a guy, I trust him to get the guy he wants. So we'll see what happens with Chess, with Bowen. Obviously, two guys. We put them on the hot board. Go check that out on Tide Illustrated. Two guys we would definitely be watching in terms of their possible being possible additions for Alabama to join Williamson in the portal. I do not think the Tide is done. That's one thing we can be certain about. The Tide is probably not done.
They have too many spots that they need after losing all these people. So
yeah, they're certainly not done with Williamson. So there's a little kind of primer for hoops as we look toward the offseason, or turn the page fully toward the offseason here. The transfer portal will run through April 22nd, which seems like a long day away, or a long way away. It's not. It will go by very, very quickly. And keep in mind that is the deadline to enter the portal. So Alabama can still sign guys after that date. I think they signed a couple guys last year after that date, if I'm not mistaken. But I'd have to go back and look last year. But yeah, busy times for Alabama basketball in the offseason here now. And Tony, on top of all that, we've got more speculation to do on the football side of things, with spring football still rocking and rolling. We'll have a busy week with spring camp, another scrimmage coming up. Alabama had its first one while we were over in Newark covering hoops. Tide scrimmaged. Some people talked to Kalen DeBoer after that, got his take on some things. We'll have another week. Obviously, spring football will continue through the 12th, when A-Day, which I'm not going to call a scrimmage. I don't know what to call it anymore.
A-Day event is what we're
A-Day event is what we're settling on. All right. I can get on board with that. But with A-Day coming up, but Tony, what did you hear from this second scrimmage, or this first scrimmage, excuse me, and your takeaways and things to now look forward to in these next coming weeks here on the football frontier?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it kind of reaffirmed everything that I thought about Ty Simpson. I think there's this, notion that Ty Simpson, because he had to wait so long for his job, and because Alabama wasn't necessarily elite during that, at the quarterback position, while he was waiting, that he just wasn't good. And I think that I think Ty Simpson is someone to be excited about. We heard through our sources that he had all 3 of Alabama's touchdowns during the scrimmage. He was the only quarterback to throw a touchdown. And so, he moved the ball well, didn't throw an interception. I think that he's a guy that is an exciting player. And I think right now, I don't think Alabama is going to give away the starting job. First of all, it just doesn't make business sense to do it. You don't want to scare off anyone, but I'd be very surprised if that first snap against Florida State down in Tallahassee, I think that's going to be taken by Ty Simpson, and he's doing everything he needs to do at the moment to get that starting job, and I expect him to have it. He did well, and then all 3 of those touchdown passes, from what I heard, were to Isaiah Horton, the Miami transfer wide receiver. Big target, something that Alabama was missing in terms of size at the wide receiver position. One of those touchdown passes, I was, kind of was across the end zone from what I was told, and then he kind of jumped up and got it. That's exactly what, you're going to want from, the 6'5", 6'4" kind of receiver. So, really encouraged by that. Some younger guys to watch. Latsier Brooks, I know you're really high on him. He was another name that kind of came up as somebody that was worth watching. I heard some good things about Daniel Hill, which when you just look at how, he's a guy you haven't really seen at the running back position, but he's 240 pounds. He's like, 6'2", 240. I mean, he's a tank. He's kind of looks like Derrick Henry back there. Kind of encouraging to hear good stuff about him. One name too that I heard as somebody that's not only been doing well just in these in the scrimmage, but somebody that I think I personally have been overlooking is Gino Vandermark at the left guard spot. I think I've been thinking that it's going to be Cam Dewberry or it's going to be maybe Michael Carroll when things start to click, but I've heard that Gino Vandermark's been doing really well. He's been the primary guy at left guard, and he already knows the system. He knows Chris Kapelovich, Kapelovich from their time together at Michigan State. Don't count him out. He's also the backup center, but don't count him out at that left guard spot as well. So it's kind of hard to project the offensive line without Caden Proctor, but maybe we've got it. Maybe that's maybe it's Caden and then Gino, and then I think the right side of it's pretty straightforward in that it's going to be Parker Brailsford, Jaden Roberts, and Wilkin Formby. So, from what I heard from the scrimmage, some of the problems on the offensive line were at people that are not going to be starters at the position. Like I heard that, Olas Allen kind of had some problems, stopping people at the tackle position. Well, fortunately for Alabama, they're going to have Caden Proctor back there, and he's a lot more established than that. I mean, you do want to see some of those guys progress, but if you're going up against a first team defense and you're getting beat, well, it helps when the guy that's reportedly from my notes that got beat is not going to be the starter. I think it's a good time for him to kind of learn from that, but also for Alabama to be confident that they have replacements as well.
Yeah, some exciting stuff on the offense. I mean, Gino Vandermark, if he can lock that left guard position down earlier than maybe expected, or if he ends up winning that job, that'd be, I think, significant in terms of, like you said, getting the starting offensive line really situated ahead of fall camp. That feels like a big development to watch. Going forward now, maybe on the defensive side, what are you looking for? Maybe other storylines, things to ask here from the players. DeBoer, obviously, we'll talk to him a couple more times before the end of the spring window here. What more are you looking for? Maybe on the other side of the ball.
I'm trying to look back at my notes. Yeah, trying to look back at my notes to see the exact adjective that was used to me. Salty was the way that the defense was described. I didn't get as many standout guys in terms of it was more of a group sum in the scrimmage in terms of who did well according to my sources. But this defense, I think, could be really good again. I think the big thing, and it's kind of hard to judge in a scrimmage where you have an offensive line that's still patching its way together. Obviously, that's going to make the pass rush look a little bit better. I think if Alabama can establish its pass rush with some of the guys like, LT Overton was so close last year. He had so many times. If he can just take that next step, you've got other guys too on the defensive line. You start getting some of those pressures, turn them into sacks. I think you're going to have a great secondary. I mean, you got Damani Jackson, Xavier Brown. You got Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb in the safety positions. There's a couple of ways you can go with the Husky role. So I think that there's a lot of excitement on the defensive side of the ball. I think it'll be a really solid unit. You get Deontay Lawson back. And, we didn't think that was going to happen. And not only do you get Deontay Lawson back, you get Justin Jefferson back, and you brought in Nickel Hill-Green. So you got three. All of a sudden, you go from wondering if you're going to go from 3 to 0, and now you go from 3 to 3. So that's huge. So I'm encouraged by the defense. When you look at it, I think you're still kind of poisoned by the doom and gloom of last season, because when you look at this roster, it's kind of I don't want to pump too much sunshine or anything. And obviously there was flaws on last year's team, and a lot of it's going to come down to that quarterback position and how well they can go from there. But if Ty Simpson can be a decent quarterback, I think this is a playoff team, and it's a contending playoff team. I mean, you look at some of these pieces, they really are excited, and it's kind of a balanced team. There's not as many superstar players right now. There's guys that could be superstar players. I think maybe that's where some of the hype is. Outside of Ryan Williams, there's not a lot of guys that are like, this guy is a superstar.
Right.
And so maybe that's why people aren't as, high on some of the, some of these Saban teams that were great had guys, you had a Will Anderson, you had a Bryce Young, you just had like a Najee Harris kind of, you just had these superstar guys. You don't necessarily have those, but you got a lot of solid guys. You got a lot of Jeremy Bernards and the name's not coming. Jam Miller, sorry, the name's not coming to me, but yeah, Jam Miller. You've got guys like that. Even on the defensive side of the ball, guys like Justin Jefferson, guys like LT Overton, Tim Smith. Sorry. I'm really screwing up names. Tim Keenan. You've got guys that aren't necessarily superstars, but guys that are, really good players that could turn into superstars. And so, I think enough of those guys will hit. This could be a really good team.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Just assembling a solid core. Again, so much of it revolves around where Simpson goes, but I'm really excited about the potential of the defense, especially the defensive front. Like if they can really buy in, I think they, Kane Womack took the first step, it felt like last year, with some of the goal line stand stuff and being kind of that wall. And now is the next step of adding in that swarm defense approach of getting to the quarterback, actually making the stops before your back is against the wall, which I think is that feels like an easy progression from a pass rush standpoint. And then you lump in the secondary and the hype it's getting as a unit. It could really be a potentially a shutdown defense. Any final thoughts, things you're looking forward to for the upcoming, kind of spring practices here, things we might
it all
continue to
comes
learn?
down, like I said, to that quarterback. I just want to see how it progresses. Can Ty build off this performance? Can somebody push him? Sometimes you'll see it. The first scrimmage is a Ty Simpson scrimmage, and the next scrimmage is Austin Mack or Keelan Russell scrimmage. These guys aren't out of it yet, and I actually, I think it'd be encouraging if the next day, Ty had a solid scrimmage, but he's getting pushed. You know what I'm saying? I think you're gonna want. I think Alabama benefits from Ty Simpson winning and being the best quarterback, because I think he's the furthest along. And I think even if he doesn't have the highest ceiling, I think from a this season standpoint, you're gonna want him to win the job and to be good. But in order for that to happen, I think he needs to be pushed. And so the thing I'm looking for is, can Austin? Everyone's talking about Ty after this first scrimmage. Can Austin Mack come in now and put together a good second scrimmage and keep that fire under Ty and continuously push him heading into the fall, so that competition kind of heads up? And in order for Ty to win it, he's got to be hitting at all cylinders in the fall. I think that's the best for Alabama. So really want to see the quarterback competition. Ryan Williams did not scrimmage in the first scrimmage. I've heard it's nothing serious, but I also heard through sources that he didn't scrimmage. So kind of excited to see maybe, if he's going to scrimmage in the second scrimmage, what it's going to look like if Isaiah Horton's had 3 touchdowns. What's that offense going to look like when they add one of the best players in the nation to it. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah, plenty of things to look forward to. We'll obviously talk to DeBoer here in this upcoming week. Subscribe over on Tide Illustrated for that. We'll have more pods too, talking off-season football, a ton of basketball stuff over on the site as well. So never sleeps here on Tide Illustrated. Always stuff going on, even when the basketball season wraps up. We'll see how Alabama goes about the rest of the transfer portal. Just released a hot board, like I said. So plenty to look forward to. And more pods coming up as well. So stay tuned for that. Until then, we'll see you next time.